Hello, everybody. Welcome to the April 2024 version of the Mayor's Monthly video. So why don't we just get started and go right into it. I'm going to go through the overview for you. So the purpose of this thing is to take questions and concerns that I get from citizens, share them with you. So that's the first thing we're going to start with is citizen questions and concerns. I have a requirement to do a mayor's monthly or semi-annual financial condition statement to the city council. So I'm going to give you a quick overview of that. And then I like to share concerns from citizens with you. So what I'd like to do is take the opportunity at the end here to share one of my concerns with the people of Columbiana. So here we go. So ask the mayor a question. I got the question that says, I was surprised at how rude and unprofessional the staff at City Hall was. Now this comment had a little bit more information to it, but that was the gist of it. And obviously I was disappointed to hear that. So it was an anonymous comment. And we give folks the opportunity, if they have a question or comment, to do it anonymously on the Ask a Mayor a Question link. But I like to be able to go back to that person, ask them some questions, get more information when I can, and respond directly to them. But didn't have the opportunity to do that, so I'm responding to it today. And obviously when you get these comments, the details and the information is limited. Like I said, there was more to it than the comment that I mentioned there, but it was still pretty limited. So I wanted to share with you what my philosophy is about public service. I truly believe that my job as mayor and the city council and the staff at City Hall, all the city employees, we are public servants. We're here to serve you. It's not your job to serve us. And sometimes, unfortunately, we may forget about that. And we have some limitations about what we can do relative to that service because we're limited by statutes from the state of Alabama, financial issues and things of that nature. But at the end of the day, it's our job to serve you. So that's number one. Number two is we should always treat everybody with dignity and respect. Now that's a two-way street. We should be treated the same way. Now I know when people come to City Hall, oftentimes they come and it's not a pleasant reason why they're coming. They may be coming to pay a traffic fine, or they may be, or some other municipal fine, or they may be there to renew or to open up get a business license for the city. They're forking out some money, and they're probably not coming in the best of moods. And sometimes that may make them a little grouchy. It may make our folks respond inappropriately to that. But at the end of the day, we should treat each other with dignity and respect. I also know that there's two sides to every story. There's your side, and then there's our side, or my side, if you will. And the truth is usually somewhere in between there. And in an anonymous complaint like this, it's kind of hard to find that. But at the end of the day, we take these things seriously, and I wanted to share with you a little bit about my philosophy on being a public servant leadership, and treating everybody with dignity and respect. If some of you have had the opportunity to see the April Bugler article that I wrote, I mentioned this book, and it's God's Little Devotional Book for Leaders. This was a gift to me. It was given to me by someone that I respected, a leader that served as a consultant for me once upon a time. He was a retired Army 4-star general. I had a great deal of respect in him, and I valued his counsel. So he gave me this book, and I guess he thought I needed it, and he was probably right. But I wanted to share this story with you, which I think is kind of applicable to this philosophy of servant leadership. Now this book, the way it's written, there's a chapter. The chapter's about a particular subject, a story that an anonymous individual has submitted, and it's been compiled in the book. And then along with that, at the end of that story, there is a passage of scripture that supports that particular story. So the story about servant leadership I wanted to share with you. I'm going to read this. So shortly after Booker T. Washington became head of the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama, he was walking past the house of a wealthy family. The woman of the house, assuming Washington was one of the yard workers her husband had hired, asked him if he would chop some wood for her. Professor Washington smiled, nodded, took off his coat, and chopped the wood. When he carried the armload of wood into the woman's kitchen, a servant girl in the kitchen recognized him and rushed to her mistress to tell her of his identity. The next morning, the woman appeared in Washington's office, apologizing profusely. She said repeatedly, "I did not know it was you I put to work." Washington replied generously, "It's entirely all right, madam. I like to work and I'm delighted to do favors for my friends." The woman was so taken with his manner and his willingness to forgive that she gave generous gifts to the Institute and persuaded many of her wealthy friends and acquaintances to do the same. In the end, Washington raised as much money for the Institute from this one act of chopping wood as he did from any other fundraising event. A great leader is never beyond hard work, and the willing to serve others is the essence of leadership. The passage of scripture that goes along with this is Matthew 23:11, and it says, "But the greatest among you shall be your servant." So that's sort of the philosophy I'd like to see us adopt in the city of Columbiana. I also want to say I have an open door policy. Now, mayor of Columbiana is a part-time job, and I'm not always there. I teach a class at the University of Montevallo, and I also have other things that I have to do that take me out of the office. So, but if I'm there and you have an issue with the staff at City Hall, please don't hesitate to ask to see me or make an appointment if I'm not there and come back and see me. I'm happy to listen to you, and I think it is worthwhile for me to hear from you directly and us have that interaction. So now let me share with you the action that I took over this issue. So I called the staff of the City Hall in, and I spoke to all of them, and basically I shared with them what I've shared with you about our public service philosophy, treating everybody with dignity and respect, and to try to avoid, if they possibly can, confrontation with folks when they come to City Hall. We're not perfect. I'm certainly not perfect. Hopefully we'll do a better job with that, but I appreciate the comment. And I'm going to share this too at my next meeting with our department heads of the city, so that all of the departments within city, not just the folks at City Hall, will understand what our philosophy is and what it is that we embrace as far as being public servants. Okay, now this is going to bore you to tears. This is the mayor's semi-annual financial condition statement to the council. Now, it's several pages long, but I'm going to go ahead and share with you the basics. So Section 114384 of the Code of Alabama requires the mayor present a semi-annual written statement to the council of the city's financial condition and show all temporary floating indebtedness for what created and the steps he or she will take to protect the credit of the city. So there's three basic things there that are important: financial condition, temporary floating indebtedness, and protect the credit of the city. Now, our financial condition, we measure that by tracking our progress towards our city budget. And if you look at the chart here, you'll see this table at the top next to the financial condition budget. And I show that and brief that. We brief that very briefly, though, at the second city council meeting of every month. And it just sort of tells you where we are to date. If you take a look at this, it shows you what our budget is, what our actual expenses are, and what the variance to the budget is. So we have budgeted a net surplus in our general fund through the end of March of this year of about $1.8 million. Our actual surplus in the general fund is about $3.2 million. And so we are about $1.5 million ahead of where we had planned to be. Now, that's affected by the timing of things. We estimate when we're going to incur certain costs, when we're going to incur or receive certain revenue, but sometimes things don't happen exactly when we estimated when we prepared the budget. So down at the bottom, you also see a total net surplus, which includes all of the city's funds, including the general fund. And for that, we're pretty much right on the money. We had about a $1.8 million surplus planned, net surplus. We're at about $1.74 million. That's about $84,000 below plan, but for basically a $12 million budget, that's pretty much right on target at this point in time. If we continue to receive revenue and expend money at the same rate, we should end up the year about $388,000 ahead of where we had planned to be. Now, the big driver for that change for all the other funds has to do with our sewer project. We had planned to spend most of the grant money that we had received this year, but the process of getting that program started has been challenging, to say the least. There are a lot of environmental hoops to jump through, if you will, approvals and reviews and things of that nature. And we just finally, within the last month, got all of our final approvals that are going to allow us to now put that work out for bid. And the way the grant works, you receive the revenue after you incur the cost. Once we incur the cost, we submit to the state. They reimburse us for that cost, if you will. And so we're going to obviously be behind the plan on that. So we're not going to receive as much revenue, but likewise, we're not going to incur the cost either. So it kind of washes itself out. Temporary floating indebtedness. Now, what is that? Floating indebtedness is, as the name implies, it's temporary in nature, and it's usually money that the city or a municipality will borrow in the short term to cover any budgetary shortfalls that they may have. And oftentimes, they roll this over year after year, if you will, and that's why it's called floating. And it might be a 6-month loan or note, it might be a year, but the interest rate changes, or it floats based upon what the current interest rates are when you roll it over. Now, the good news is we don't have any temporary floating indebtedness in Columbiana. We do have some long-term debt, and this chart here shows you what that is. We've got about $13.8 million of debt outstanding. Our debt service for this fiscal year is about $766,000, which means that that's what we have to pay in interest and principal this year in order to pay down that debt, if you will. All right, so protecting the credit of the city. What do we do to protect the credit of the city? Well, first, we just need to make sure that we ensure that we got the money to pay the bills when they come in. And we do that through our budgeting process. Now, the state of Alabama doesn't formally require us to have a budget, but what they do require us to do is to appropriate funds, and those funds that we appropriate cannot exceed 90% of our anticipated revenue. So those funds, or those appropriations, are basically our budgeted expenses. And the 90% of anticipated revenues is our tax revenue, grant money, other things. So in fiscal year 24, we we budgeted about 89.8% of the funds that we had available for funds to pay our expenses. Now, another thing we can do is make sure that we budget a financial reserve. I talked to you about the financial reserve of the net surplus on the previous chart. But what should that be? So the Government Finance Officers Association, which is an organization, and they recommend a minimum of 2 months of general fund operating expenses. Now, our budget in FY24 is about 2.14, just a little bit ahead of that. Now, another way of looking at that is credit rating agencies who rate Columbiana's credit. The last time we were rated AA, which is considered very good. They recommend a general fund balance of 60 days or 17% of general fund expenses. Now, that's just another way of saying a 2-month surplus, if you will. So if you look at it, Columbiana budgeted 17.8%, just a little bit above the 17, just like we have 2.14 months of reserve, which is a little bit above the 2 months. So those two things sort of support each other. The last thing we need to look at is liquidity. That's, do we have the cash every day to be able to pay our bills? One way to do that is with this thing called a quick ratio. Now, if there's any finance and accounting people out there listening to this, you're going to know that we're not doing the quick ratio the way it's supposed to be done. And that's because we do not have financial statements that are prepared in accordance with the Government Accounting Standards Board. We basically use do our budgeting on a cash basis, and we manage our performance to that budget on a cash basis. So a quick ratio of 1 or greater basically means that you've got the funds to pay your short-term expenses. Now, our budgeted quick ratio in fiscal year 24 was 1.18. It's not a whole lot of margin, but it says you got the the funds to do that. The actual year to date, as I mentioned to you that we were performing fairly well, is about 2.23. So we're looking pretty good as far as liquidity and the ability to pay our bills. So the other thing that's thing that we do, number one, is ensure that we have the funds to pay the bill, and those are the tools that we use to do that. Then we need to manage our debt limits and our debt service, which is our payments. Section 225 of the Constitution of the State of Alabama and Amendment 772 to that same Constitution prescribe statutory debt limits for us. 225 says we can only borrow up to 20% of the assessed value of the taxable property in the city. Now, Amendment 772 allows us to borrow more, in addition to that 20%, 50% of the assessed value of the property in our city for the purposes of economic development or industrial development. So we are well within that. We could borrow another $11 million if we wanted to, which is probably wouldn't be a good idea for us. Now, the other thing that we should do is make sure that our debt service, the payments that we make, is only about 10 to 15% of our recurring taxes and fees. Now, there are different folks. The finance director at the League of Municipalities likes to see it at 10% or below. I've done some research where other communities will say, or other experts will say, if you're getting above 15%, it's probably too high and you need to work on getting it down. Our debt service is about 13.9% of our recurring taxes and fees. So it's in between that window, but it's up on the high side. So we probably need to be working on that. Now, a final way that some people look at this is the sum of capital investment, what we spend on things like roads, sewer projects, building and other infrastructure, plus our debt service should be in the range of 25 to 30% of our recurring taxes and fees. We're above that. In fiscal year 24, we budgeted about 34%. So those things are telling us that even though we have statutory authority to borrow more money, we probably need to be tightening our belt a little bit and not doing that. So the last thing we can do is improve our debt ratio and increase our financial reserves. Now, we can do that. The preferred way is through economic development. That's doing what we can to help the businesses in our city to be as successful as they can possibly be, to generate tax revenue for the city, and to also attract new business to the city. The other thing that we can do, which is probably the least popular, is to raise taxes or to raise user fees. Taxes, we have the opportunity to increase property taxes. Alabama has the second lowest property taxes or ad valorem taxes in the nation, but we can't do it independently. The city of Columbiana already charges the max that it's allowed to do without a referendum that we would have to put for a vote of our populace. And my guess is most people would not vote to have their property taxes increased. The other thing is user fees. These would be things like garbage fees, sewer fees, and things of that nature. Our neighbors have raised their sales tax. We could do that by 1 cent if we wanted to, but I consider that a tax on maybe the poorest in the city. And user fees, our neighbors have increased their user fees primarily significantly as far as garbage pickup. Now, we have incurred a cost of 42% increase this year of what it costs us to dump our garbage in the county landfill. So there may come a time that we're pressed and we may have to take a look at that. So you can read this full report. I've put the link here. It's on the City of Columbiana website, and you'll get more information about that. All right, so the last thing is my concern. I truly believe, going back to this servant leadership comment that we discussed earlier, that my number one job is to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to serve every citizen of Columbiana. And my concern is that we have a lack of affordable housing. And I do that by simply taking a look at what our median household income is in Columbiana, and looking at what The median cost of a new home, say like in Springs Crossing or Saddlewood Trails, the new developments on Highway 70 that's about $265,000 is the median for those. And given current mortgage rates and what the approval requirements are, which is usually a maximum of 28% of your gross income is the maximum mortgage payment that lenders will approve, that only 20% of our population can afford the median priced home in either one of those subdivisions. So that's concerning to me. And we also, people are having problems being able to provide or buy a home. So that means we need more people, more property for people to rent. There seems to be some shortage there. And many of our apartment complexes, most of them, as a matter of fact, are rent subsidized, and some of our folks might not be able to afford a home, but at the same time, they can't qualify for a rent subsidy. So we really need to take a hard look at that. There was, on January 23rd at our city council meeting, the Planning Commission made a presentation to the council and suggested that we impose a moratorium on R3 housing developments. Now again, Springs Crossing, Saddlewood Trails, those developments are R3. And like I said, only about 20% of our population can afford those. And of course, it depends upon how much money people have available to put down. But to look at it a different way, the median household income means that half the people in the city make more, half of the households in the city make less, and basically that means that 50%, and the median household income won't buy you a house in one of those subdivisions, so we know at least 50% of the people can't do it, and unless they had a large down payment, based on my estimate about what people typically put down on a home, only about 20% would be able to afford it. So the suggestion was, let's impose a moratorium, and there was reasons why that was done, and I want to share that with you. But the thing you need to know is that Saddlewood Trails and Springs Crossing are R3. R1 subdivisions would be generally larger lots. So some of the information that was shared is on this chart here, and I think it's misleading. I don't know that it was intentionally done that way. I don't believe that it was. But the information is misleading because it says in here, and it's in bold print, 45% of our houses built in the last 4 years are R3. And that's because we've approved 728 homes to be R3 or smaller with variances. Now there's several things wrong with that. R3 determines the size of the lot, okay? There is some minimum requirements or maximum requirements as far as home size, but it's square footage based on the area given the size of the lot. And so in an R3 lot, which is 7,200 square feet, the minimum is about a 2,500 square foot home. If it were a two-story, now that's the area of the home on the lot, what percentage of the lot it can occupy. If it is 2 stories, you could theoretically put a 5,000 square foot home on that lot. So it's the size of the lot which is driving it more so than it's the size of the home. But the information presented at council was that there were 728 homes approved within the last 4 years. Well, actually that includes some housing that was approved prior to 2020. And those 728 homes haven't been built. Since 2019, we've only built approximately 170 new homes. So where it was presented that we've had as 45% growth in housing, it's only been about 9.5%, and we're growing at a rate of about 1.7% a year, which is not very much. But at the rate we've been building houses, which is averaging about 35 a year, it's going to take us 16 years if that rate doesn't speed up to build the remaining 558 homes. Now, I believe that rate will speed up, but again, we do still have some economic issues with inflation and interest rates, et cetera, that could continue to keep that slowed for a while. I believe that You know, I believe in the American dream that everybody wants to own their own home. And I think that the residents of Columbiana deserve to own their own home, and that we shouldn't legislate or regulate such that it makes it more difficult for people to be able to afford that. The other thing about my opinion is I don't believe that doing nothing, which is what a moratorium is, should ever be an option. We always should be open-minded to do whatever is needed based upon the circumstances. So we don't need the moratorium because we have a process in place that precludes the need for that. The way the process works, if somebody wants to come in and rezone some property from R1 to R3 because they want to develop it, they have to present a plan to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission looks at that plan. They also have to have a public hearing, and I love for the public to be able to come in. Unfortunately, most people don't attend those things, but we get an opportunity to at least hear from the public. Then after that, then the Planning Commission makes a recommendation to the City Council. They do not have the authority to zone or rezone property. That authority rests with the City Council. When it comes before the City Council, guess what? We have to have another public hearing. So we've given people 2 chances to come in and say, yes, we'd like to see this property zoned R3, or no, we would not like it. So we get to hear that. The last thing is I went to our city attorney and said, do we even have the authority, since we have these zoning regulations, to impose a moratorium? And we do, but he said it must be used very sparingly. The city attorney said there must be some overriding public need justifying the moratorium, such as a proliferation of businesses, such as vape shops, tattoo parlors, payday loans, etc., with inadequate zoning and other regulations in place. Well, that's not the case that we have here. And so I don't see that there's an overriding public need to put the moratorium. In fact, as I expressed my concern, I think there's an overriding public need that we have more affordable housing. I think the dream of American homeownership is slipping away. And I think part of this is this misplaced perception of growth. When people drive down Highway 70 and they see Springs Crossing on one side and they see Saddlewood Trails on the other, there's an assumption that there's an enormous amount of growth. And unfortunately, that's not really the case. So this next chart here is basically from the World Population Review, and it uses census data, but most of the data on here is an estimate. Except for in the census years. So it starts at 1980. There was a census in 90, in 2000, 2010, 2020. And Columbiana's population peaked in 2017 at about 4,600. This estimate for 2024 is that the population is 4,830, but it is an estimate. It is not a count. And again, it's from this source called World Population Review, which supposedly looks at trends of how communities around us are growing, as well as looking at census data. But if you can see that our population declined from 2017 to 2020, and this estimate shows it increasing, which, you know, it needs to, and I hope it does, and I don't think that's a significant amount. But if you look at it differently, this is all Census Department data. And if you look at this next chart where you see the green triangles, that's the 2010 census and the 2020 census. Those are the actual counts. Every little dot for every year between there is actually an estimate of population. So when it said we had a little over 4,600 people in 2017, that was an estimate. Maybe we did, maybe we didn't. Then they did the 2020 census. It took us down to a little over 4,400 people. And then between census, the Census Bureau does these things called community surveys, where they send surveys out and get some response. And they look at the other data and they look at the community service. Now, the Census Bureau, as opposed to the World Population Review, shows that our population declined again in 2021. And I don't have any further data from the Census Bureau beyond that. Those little lines, the dotted lines, one is a linear trend line, and you can see that it shows us growing up to around 2022 of around 4,600 people if you follow the the linear trend line. But the one that's curved is called a polynomial trend line. And that one basically follows what's really happening as far as the ups and the downs. And you can see that it shows population trending down. So who knows? Population stuff is kind of all over the map. But at the end of the day, I don't think that we want to impose any moratoriums on R3s. And I think that maybe there's this misplaced perception of excessive or rapid growth. Now, in 2022, the city of Columbiana put together a team. I was part of it. Some of the city council were part of it. And we participated in the Alabama Economic Development Academy. And this textbook was written by the gentleman who led that. He's a former economic development council or economic development office director for the state of Alabama. And then his co-writer is a PhD from University of Southern Mississippi. Now, a lot of people think economic development is big city stuff. And big cities do spend a lot of money and have a staff that's focused on economic development. We can't afford that. But it's not big city stuff. And these authors of this book are not big city guys. Neil Wade, who was on the governor's staff, is from Monroeville, Alabama. Today he lives in Aniana, so he's not a big city guy. And as I said, Bill Smith, who's the academic who helped write the book, he's at the University of Southern Mississippi. So a couple of things from this book that I think are noteworthy. One of them, if you open it up in the very beginning, their statement to economic development agents and communities is, "Woe unto those communities that do not look to the future and keep up." And you know, we all love our community and we want it to stay a charming small town, but that doesn't mean that we can't have any growth in doing that. We just simply have to manage that growth. And if we don't keep up, then our businesses are going to die and we will have significant problems. Now, nobody, as mayor, you know, my job is to be the head cheerleader and to go out and tell everybody how great our city is, and I do that every chance I get. But you have to sometimes accept the reality of the way things are. And one of the things it says here is, in reality, community leaders and stakeholders really do not want to hear negatives, even though it is a necessary step toward becoming a high-definition community. In other words, you kind of have to first say, okay, we got some problems. What are those problems if we're going to be able to adequately address them and fix them? So at the end of the day, on this issue of affordable housing and the R3 housing developments, what I want to do is to hear from you. And so I've put my email address on here. I'd like for you to send me your thoughts, your comments to my email. I probably, if I get a lot of these, and I hope that I do, I probably won't be able to respond to all of you, but please send me an email and let me hear your thoughts about housing in Columbiana. My email address, dmitchell@cityofcolumbiana.com. So that's about all I've got for April. So keep those cards, letters, comments, questions coming in, and I hope you have a great rest of your month, and I'll see you next month.